Okay, so I'm filming this and recording this because I thought a lot of people, particularly in the Rachav area, are here and then aren't here. They're either here for 6 months and then went to America for a visit, or they're actually between two. So it would be a pity if you join in a series like this on Great Jewish Women and then you miss them. So I thought if I record it, if I record it and I've got a video, then all you need to do is to email me and then I can send it. I said, I missed last week's share, no problem. And then you got it. So you've not lost anything. Right, so that's... And today I will go out and buy a proper stand for the phone and a nice little clip-on microphone so I can jump about. So this is a very professional service you're getting.
Thank you for the service.
Okay. Last week...
Appreciate it.
Last week I ran out of time, which is one of my fortes. And I didn't get to tell you about the great woman who fit together with who we were discussing last week, which was Nesevis Bas Adiel, and she was, of course, David Amelech's mother. And the question that obviously disturbs anybody here who is a mother, or just generally, is why did she allow her son to go through all that Gehenna of being rejected by effectively every single person, and he had a really terrible upbringing. Your hand is now being recorded for posterity. Just letting you know, don't want you to feel any guilt whatsoever. So I think obviously there is such a thing as tough love, and we talked about that. Another reason I think we talked about it is because she doesn't want the Sotan to discover the identity of this person. And up until Shmuel comes along and anoints him as king, then he is just... The Yiddish phrase is an Auswarf. Are you familiar with that one? A reject.
Yes.
He's literally a reject. Anyway, so that was that. And at the end, it all fits beautifully into place. She says, Evan Melissa Aboni, the stone that was rejected by the builders, that becomes the foundation. That's David Amelech. He builds the foundations for the base of Mikdash. His son Shlomo completes. The brothers, realizing their incredible mistake, you're going to feel bad. But they complete their sentence, which is also in Tehillim, and that was that. So I just want to focus on this idea of tough love. Hard to do. In fact, I remember a friend of mine told me that 3 of his children, was a very close friend of mine, had come at some points in their life to say that absolutely everything that had gone wrong in their life was entirely due to him. Now I happen to know this fellow and his wife extremely well. And they are wonderful people. They're blessed to be wealthy without in any way being showy or allowing that to corrupt them. And they're really, really good parents. One of the boys was divorced, and that was the fault of the parents. Can you figure that one? The reason was, he told me, because you were too overprotective bringing us up. And therefore, consequently, you didn't let me have any knocks and tumbles along the way. I was not toughened up enough, so when I needed to fight to save my marriage, I wasn't capable, I hadn't the chinuch in fighting. Wow! Imagine that as an accusation. You were a protective parent, and you protected from all sorts of nasty stuff. How dare you! Well, I think we all know this is a no-win situation, generally until your children become parents themselves. At which point they realise that it's not quite... And we did the same thing probably to our parents. I remember distinctly being very angry with my father because he was doing something with paper, and I'd come in because my teddy bear, which had arms that went like that, he was called Ted. I gave him the name Ted when I was 3, so I make no apologies for lack of imagination. I think it's quite good for the 3-year-old. Ted's arm had come off. Well, this is a major crisis. And I came in, and my father, get out! Get out, you busy! And I went out thinking, what a terrible father. Huh. Charlie's father would have fixed the teddy bear. Charlie, etc. I wrote this in one of my books because I remember one of my sons coming in to see me because his toy plane, the wing had come off. And I was looking at a letter, which was probably the same as my father. Not a lawyer's letter, that would be bad. A banker's letter, the bank manager was writing to me that I was overdrawn yet again. And if I didn't inject some cash, had none, into my account now, then the account was going to be closed, etc., etc. And that's what I was looking at when my son came in. So I was pulling my hair out. Get out there! And when he went outside, I'm sure that's what he was thinking, because that's what I was thinking about my dad, when the arm came off. In fact, if you think about it, my dad's bank manager might have been the father of my bank manager, because that's how evil behaviour runs in families. But it's when you become a parent yourself, you realise that parenting is quite a challenge, it's quite a trick, until of course you realise that, and then it makes you realise that maybe your parents weren't quite so bad. So whichever way, if you're not protective enough, right, soft love, is that the opposite of tough love? I suppose so. Gentle love, never criticising, then that's going to be criticised. It's going to be criticised. We're going to be criticised. Get used to it. Anyway, so the story of the lady at the end of that chapter, I wanted to share with you. I can't remember, and I've been rushing about like crazy this week, if this bit is in the book. Her husband was learning here. He's called Rabbi Plancy. He's actually not a rabbi. His father was Rabbi Plancy, and he just passed away sadly 2 weeks ago. He was one of the most talented bagpipers I ever came across in my life. He, like me, was blessed to be Scottish and Jewish. But he was tremendous. He was a virtuoso in the bagpipes.
Wow.
And at every family wedding, he would stand up there, in his yeshiva regalia, like General Penguin appearance, and whip out his bagpipes. And he was just fantastic. His son was here in Jerusalem, and somebody asked him if he would be willing to look after a very seriously sick kid. And he was quite talented at that. This is the very, very short version. Anyway, when he got into this, as they say, when it was time for him to marry, he said to his wife, I really am looking for somebody who wants to join me in that process. To cut a very long story short, Rachav Plancy, who is a fabulous person, she and her husband are now the heads of Camp Simcha in the UK. Their budget is millions and millions and millions of dollars. Their responsibility, the scope of their work is astonishing. And they have three retreats per year. The first one, she told me, it was a Shabbaton which mixed their non-religious customers with the religious customers, clients, you should say. But that didn't quite work. Because non-religious Jews and Shabbos, they're antsy, and they want to do stuff and check their iPhones. So they got their own retreat. Then they have a retreat for kids with cancer. Or rather for the parents with kids with cancer. And then they have a retreat for kids and their parents with worse diseases than cancer. Because lots of, particularly childhood cancers, are completely curable. That's the important thing to say. I've got a book on this subject. I've got a book on almost every subject. It's called The Little Book for Big Worries, dealing with serious illness. And how you say things are important. So I don't like the word remission. Remission is a hint that maybe it's resting at the moment. I want the word cure. Don't use the word remission. Anyway, so basically there are diseases that have no cure. Lots of childhood cancers do. Childhood leukemia has got some 95% cure rate. That is cure rate. So basically, there's another camp, and these kids who go there's nothing. They're just, the clock is ticking. And so I went there for the first time. That's what they brought me to speak at. I was to be the rabbi over the weekend. It was tremendous. It's one of the, I've been about a bit. Been on planet Earth for nearly 70 rotations around the sun. And there's lots of fabulous memories. Incidentally, I look forward to this year. It's my high spot of my week, just letting you know. I give others share, but this is a very good share. Anyway, but basically, doing that Shabbaton, and they brought me back immediately the next year, and then dropped me. Then that was the high spot. I remember we were sitting there Friday night, and some of the kids were so ill. There was a lady standing there like the Statue of Liberty. She had her hand up like that. There was a bag of white liquid and a tube coming straight into a little boy's stomach, because that's how the child could eat. Anyway, it was very successful. I think I was scheduled to speak to the women 4 times and the men once. That says a lot about men. And even then, only a fraction of the men came, because men just don't need help. I can handle this myself. But the woman, they had, I think it was 3 or 4, And after I finished, they asked for another one. So that shows you how another session, which was very good. And then Mrs. Plancy, who is now, she runs this big organisation, and she's tough. And I don't mean that pejoratively, because, as we just said, sometimes you need to be tough. She said there are 14 couples who want to come and see you. Now, Shabbos went out in England, I think, 7 o'clock. So, how are we going to get 14 couples? The problem with being a rabbi, as opposed to being a therapist, I don't know if you've ever been to therapists, but they're professionals. So you're telling them all about the fact that you're considering suicide. Oh, sorry, time's up. We'll pick this up again next week. Maybe there won't be a next week. So, but when you go to see a rabbi, it's probably the rabbi's fault as well. I generally find that that's it. I'm there until I solve this person's problem. It can take hours and hours and hours. So she said, right, okay, there's not enough time to see them all. So what I'm going to do is, and I can't remember, maybe 15, I should read the book, 15 or 20 minutes. I'm telling them all, they've got 15 or 20 minutes, and that is it. And then I will be in and literally throw them out. So this was not my usual style of doing counselling. Anyway, so I sat there, and in came the first couple. Very sweet, very pretty young lady. I used to teach her in seminary. Very handsome young fellow. I mean, you'd think this is a glorious marriage, but they had the most seriously terminally ill child. And it wasn't that he was going to die tomorrow. He was going to die in maybe 5 years or 6 years. And he needed constant nursing. Anyway, so they sat down and they started telling me the problems, which were horrific. And as I'm listening to them, which I don't normally do, I was sort of like looking at my watch, which wasn't an Apple Watch, because you can't do this subtly with an Apple Watch. You've got to tap the screen, and that gives it away. Anyway, so I looked at my watch and I realised they only had about 8 minutes left. I said, please forgive me. This is not my usual style, but Mrs. Plancy is going to appear at that door in 8 minutes' time and throw you out. So let me stop you and cut to the chase. And then I go, what's mamish, one of the few times in my life I am convinced I had Ruach HaKodesh. So I looked at this gorgeous young couple sitting opposite me and I said, and how's your marriage? And how's your marriage? And this is funny, they both, you remember back when you were a schoolgirl and you do something wrong, and it was you and the girlfriend who did it wrong with you, and you're standing in front of the principal, the headmistress, and you're sort of like, they ask the question which is going to catch you out, and you want to sort of like signal to the other person, but you can't really sort of, and that was what was going on. So, how's your marriage? And the sort of like eyeballs trying to move, and they both started speaking at the exact same time. And she said, it's fine, and he said, it's awful. And then she looked at him. No, it wasn't going to be awful. She looked at him, and then she looked at me and said, we're not on the rocks, you know. And I said, my dear young lady, I don't think for one minute you are. It's just that you and your husband are under such pressure, such terrible alarms ringing all over the time, all over your day, rushing to hospitals and emergencies and stuff, and dealing with the other children. And I discovered there that, little did I know, that the normal children, the healthy children in a family with a sick, very sick child, hate the sick child. The sick child is monopolizing my parents completely. And it was, I learned a little there. Anyway, so I said, I don't think for one moment you're on the rocks, but you're under such terrible pressure. So look, because Mrs. Plant is coming in 5 minutes, and because I feel more like a doctor, because doctors have got like a certain amount of time they've got for a consultation. In the UK, I think it's 10 minutes. And then I'm dying. Good. See you next week. So basically, I said, I'm going to write a prescription. So there's a piece of paper, and I threw off the corner. I said, here's a prescription. And I wrote this down. And I signed it Dr. Rubenstein for fun. Okay. You will go out together, as you read, you'll go out together for a date night once a week. You will not take your mobile phone, your cell phone with you. You will remind yourselves that you love each other, and you remember how much you were in love as you stood underneath the chuppah, and that the only reason that you're sometimes not getting on is because of the situation you're in. And that's what you do every week. So he looked at me appalled and he said, "Don't take my cell phone? But what if there's an emergency?" I said, "No, you didn't listen to me. I said you will not take a cell phone. But you can take, you won't take your cell phone, but you can take a cell phone. So that your mother or whoever, father, whoever is looking after, who's standing in for you, deputizing for you, if there is a crisis, if there is an emergency, then they've got that number. But nobody else has. Nobody else can get to you. And you just have a nice evening together." And just then Mrs. Clancy opened the door. "Time's up!" Right? And I just get in that, and off they went. Poof. Oh, incidentally, they came to see me the next year. It worked. But then in came the next couple. They were not English. And so, and realising what had happened, I let them speak for 5 minutes, and I said, "And how's your marriage?" And, it was the exact same story with the exact same prescription. And that's what I did all night, 14 after 14, till we got to the total of 14. There was 2 who came from Manchester, so we were able to, I was able to see them when I went up to Manchester. And that was that. Sometimes it's got to be tough love in order to get the best results. So it sounds as though, if you didn't know the background, the David and Melis mother, have you been davening and saying her name 17 times before you daven, as we said last week, to guarantee the success of your tefillas? And Itzeves Bas Adiel. And Itzeves Bas Adiel seemed tough, seemed callous. Not at all. Because after all, she created the Mashiach. She allowed the Mashiach to emerge. But that had to be through tough love. So that gets us to where we are today. This one, I was looking last night and preparing. Sounds weird. I was reading my book. I was reading what I wrote in my book and preparing, but of course you forget what you write in the book. And I was looking at Rachav. Of course, Rachav, we were looking at just recently on Shabbos because we read Shlach Rachav. And the Haftarah of the spies going in, Moshe's spies going in, is the Haftarah tells the stories about Yeshua's spies going in. And of course they're going to be captured and caught, but somebody protects them, and that lady is called Rachav. What do you know about Rachav? Does anybody know anything about Rachav?
She was a lady of, how does we say it?
Ill repute.
Of ill repute.
Yes, a lady of ill repute. I'm looking at this now. We don't have to get this in too much depth. It is important to point out that yes, she was. The word prostitute I don't think actually applies. I think she was a courtesan. A courtesan. Now, basically that is a mistress of kings. Now there's lots of kings in Canaan, and these were her visitors. But it wasn't that she stood in street corners and stuff like that. She was very sophisticated. What she achieves, I'll jump in, this is not in the right order, but how about this? This okay, let's use the nasty word prostitute. This woman, who did she end up marrying? Oh, she becomes the Geras. Yeshua. So he's the king of the Jewish people. So the queen of the Jewish people is this ex-prostitute. Okay, so listen to this. This is from the Sifri Medrash. 8 Cohanim Gedolim were direct descendants of Rachav. 8 prophets descended from Rachav. And they were Yirmiyahu, Hilkiyahu, Zariah, Machsaiah, and there goes Baruch, Neriah, Hanamel, and Sholem, and Rabbi Yehuda, as Huldah, the prophetess, was also a descendant of Rachav. Okay? And elsewhere, in a different Medrash, Tam Nebe'Eliyahu, it says, in protecting the messengers of the Jewish people, it says that Rachav had protected the entire Jewish people. Since Hashem always rewards measure for measure, it would not be a surprise that she'd be given the merit of having children and descendants who would carry on doing the same thing. Because kings do that, and Cohanim Gedolim do that, and that's what prophets do. Now, of course, how does somebody move from one thing to the other? This is an astonishing journey. So when I was praying this last night, I must admit I was crying. I said to you last week, I think, and Itzeves Bas Adiel is the most inspiring person in Nach, but it's a close run thing with Rachav. And it's strange because, of course, it's a truly great Jewish woman then now, and of course she didn't start off as a Jewish woman, she becomes a Jewish woman. But not only a Jewish woman, I mean, who can claim to have that lineage, that kind of lineage flowing from them, the way that she has. How did she do this? Let me ask you a different question. Who would you say was greater? Now, she's a Gioris. Ruth is a Gioris. Fine. I think the three most famous Gerim in the history of Klal Yisrael is Yisro, who gets a parsha named after him, Rachav, and Ruth. Who would you say was greater? Yisro or Rachav?
Rachav.
Yes, hands down, to my mind, hands down Rachav. Do you know why? Why do you think?
She risked her life when she protected, the Kalev and...
Yeah, but you could argue that Yisro also was threatening himself, his security, by rejecting all the Avodah Zarah at the time. So I think it's because there's a huge difference. So the huge difference I got to explain to you here is. Remember, I told you not too long ago that there is a very important principle. I made this up, but I still think it's true anyway. There's no such thing as a synonym in Lashon HaKodesh. Sorry, I said that far too quickly, didn't I? There is no such thing as a synonym in Lashon HaKodesh.
Amazing.
There's no such thing as a synonym. English is full of synonyms. But if I was to say to you, Enosh, Gibor, Odom, and Ish, how would you translate those words? Man. But if there are no synonyms in Lashon HaKodesh, then why do we have four words that all mean man? And the answer is they don't all mean man. They mean different aspects of a man, right? So there's no such thing as a synonym. In English, lots of synonyms. It's actually nice as a writer that you can use a word that means the same thing. It's not the same word appearing over and over again. I was writing a piece for Spectator magazine in the UK yesterday, and I have two sentences away the same word, and you change that. There's plenty to choose from, it means the same thing. But in Lashon HaKodesh, everything is specific. Okay. How would you translate Shema?
Shema.
Here. How would you translate, as in the Seder of Hazinu, Hazen to Yazin? How would you translate that word? Here. Here. They seem both to be here. H-E-R, A-R. But they're not. They're not. So I'll give you a distinction. Imagine you're at home one night and your husband's not around, he's out of town or something. You hear a noise. What do you do next? And the noise stops. So what do you do next?
Go look. Go see what it was.
Oh, you're brave. And then you listen. Was it your imagination? Now you're listening. You hear, you listen. Does that make sense? So the difference between Azinu, and Shema is that one is listening. Shema is listening. So, bear that in mind, and I'm going to read to you the first posuk from the Seder of Yisro, and you're going to tell me what's wrong with it. And remember, we're looking through the eyes of the Alshach. That's where the questions come from. Remember the rules. God's good at Hebrew. He doesn't make any mistakes. So listen to this. Vayishma Yisro. So Yisro hears, who was Cohen Midian, the priest of Midian, Courtesan Moshe, the father-in-law of Moshe, is Kol Asher Osa Elokim LeMoshe Yisrael. Everything that God had done for Israel and for Moshe. Ki hois Hashem es Yisrael Mitzrayim. Because God had taken the Jewish people out from Egypt. That's just the first posuk, okay? Now, you've got to be Sherlock Holmeses, and you've got to have your magnifying glass. What's wrong with this? I'll read it again. Vayishma Yisro. Well, Rashi says, of course, you'll remember the first Rashi, I'm sure, is called Yisro. Sheva Shemas Nikroloi. It's 7 names altogether. Right? Reuel, Yeser, Yisro, Choivev, Chovakeni, and Putiel. So it's 7 names. Vayishma Yisro, and Yisro hears Cohen Midian. Right. Well, Yeser, Rashi goes on to explain, was one of his names. Yisro is the name he was given when he became Jewish. They added a Vav to it. Okay. So if that's right, the Yishma Yisro Cohen Midian, the priest of Midian, what's wrong with that? Well, when he was the priest of Minyan, he wasn't he wasn't Yisro, he wasn't Jewish. He was called Putiel then. So it's a contradiction. V'yishma, and he hears, or he listens, Yisro, Cohen Midian. When he was the Cohen Midian, he wasn't Yisro. When he was Yisro, he wasn't the Cohen Midian. He wasn't the priest of Avodah Zarah. There was a rabbi, I don't know his name, that's going to all that, but I won't mention it. Anyway, he used to work for Samelech, and he used to be a Roman Catholic priest. And one of these guys that tells the story and stuff like that. And I don't know what his name was. He was a priest, father, whatever. But that's not what they're going to call him now. That would be a big insult. That would be against the halacha to go up to somebody who's is a ger and became a rabbi and say, Father Francis. You can't do that. So that's what the Torah just did. V'yishma Yisro Cohen Midian. What's wrong with the next two words? Courtesan Moshe, the father-in-law of Moshe. The American phrase is duh. Oh, really? Oh, that Yisro. Not Yisro from the Bronx. No, that Yisro. We even know who he is. And we know his relationship to Moshe. Why does this have to say that? This is all obvious stuff. It's called Asher Osa Elokim LaMoshe Yisro. Fine. So the Alshach says this makes no sense whatsoever, and he says that's because you're not understanding what it's telling you. It's not telling you who he was, it's telling you how he was. It's not telling you who he was, it's telling you how he was. How did this guy, who had been the high priest to every single idolatrous religion in the world at the time, saw that it was garbage, rejected it, and on to the next one, maybe that's right, rejected that, right, and so on and so forth. How did he become the person? And the answer is in the first word, V'yishma. He was a listener. As Rashi says, the entire world knew what happened to Kriyas Yamsuf. We're all talking about it. And even though the entire world knew about it, how many people came to become Jewish? One. Can you imagine? One. Authentically, there were people that sort of turned up because, this is the winning team. But authenticity, Yisro, in the entire world. But how, and then it says Cohen Midian, but he's not Cohen Midian then. It's telling you that this man becomes Yisro despite having been Cohen Midian, because he's a listener. Because he paid attention to what happened at Kriyas Yamsuf. It was real for him. And then it says another critical component, Courtesan Moshe. He was the father-in-law of Moshe. In other words, he had a teacher. Moshe's title is Moshe Rabbeinu, the teacher. Of all the names you could give Moshe, the one that we choose for him is the pedagogue, the educator. And how about having Moshe as your personal tutor? Or Miriam, if you're a woman, as your personal tutor? I think you would reach a very high level. So, as I keep saying in all my shirim, if you want to succeed, you need a teacher, Asilach or Rav. For women, it's Asilach Rebbetzin. But you need to have a teacher. It's telling you how he succeeded. Does that make sense? But the astonishing thing is that he is one. Now, somebody sent to me yesterday, somebody else had sent this to me. I'm going to read this to you. And this, for me, was so Yisro-like, or so Rachav-like, that I was astonished. It's from a newspaper a British newspaper called the Daily Telegraph. And the Daily Telegraph is a right-wing non-Jewish newspaper, and it's quite intellectual. So the Times is sort of middle of the road, and the Guardian is Nazi. Okay. So listen to what it's a guy called Alistair Heath. Never come across him. Maybe somebody sent this to you. There's something about Israel that makes people uncomfortable, and it's not what you think it is. They'll point to politics, settlements, borders, and wars. But scratch beneath the outrage and you'll find something deeper. A discomfort not with what Israel does, but with what Israel is. A nation this small should not be this strong. Period. Israel has no oil, no special natural resources. It's not quite true. There's a gas field. A population barely the size of a mid-sized American city. They're surrounded by enemies, hated in the United Nations, targeted by terror, condemned by celebrities, boycotted, slandered, and attacked. And still, they thrive like there is no tomorrow. In military, in medicine, in security, in technology, in agriculture, in intelligence, in morality, in sheer, unbreakable will. They turn desert into farmland, they make water from air, they intercept rockets in mid-air, they rescue hostages under the nose of the world's worst regimes, they survive wars that were supposed to wipe them out, and win. The world watches this and can't make sense of it, so they do what people do when they witness strength and they can't understand. They assume it must be cheating. It must be American aid, it must be foreign lobbying, it must be oppression, it must be theft, it must be some dark trick that gave the Jews this kind of power, it must be blackmail. Because heaven forbid, it's something else. Heaven forbid, it's real. Heaven forbid, it's earned, or worse, destined. The Jewish people were supposed to disappear a long, long time ago. That's how the story of exile, enslavement, hated minorities is supposed to end, but the Jews didn't disappear. They actually became more, came home, rebuilt their land, revived their language, and brought their dead back to life in memory, in identity, and in strength. That's not normal. That's not political. It's biblical. That's astonishing. There's no cheat code that explains how a group of people return to their homeland after 2,000 years. There's no rational path from gas chambers to global influence. And there's no historical precedent for surviving the Babylonians, the Romans, the Crusaders, the Inquisition, the pogroms, and the Holocaust, and still showing up to work on Monday in Tel Aviv. Israel doesn't make sense. Unless you believe something beyond the math. He said math instead of maths. Are you an Englishman? This is what drives the world crazy. Because if Israel is real, if this improbable, ancient, hated nation is somehow still chosen, protected and thriving, then maybe God isn't a myth after all. Maybe he's still in the story. Maybe history isn't random. Maybe evil doesn't get the last word. And maybe the Jews are not just a people, but a testimony. Quite moving. That's what they can't stand. Because once you admit that Israel's survival isn't just impressive, but divine, everything changes. Your moral compass has to reset, your assumptions about history, power, and justice collapse. You realize you're not watching the end of an empire, you're witnessing the beginning of something eternal. So they deny it, they smear it, and rage against it. Because it's easier to call a miracle cheating than to face the possibility that God keeps his promises. And he's keeping them still. Isn't that astonishing?
Yeah.
I'm totally blown away.
Change your life.
If you want a copy of that, if you
Yes.
email me, and
What's
I will
your
send.
email?
It's very easy. Rubinsteinyyy@gmail.com. It's Rubinstein with an I. Rubinsteinyyy@gmail.com. Absolutely astonishing. The people are sending it in WhatsApp. It's all squished together. I made it. I paragraphed it, so it'll be easy for you to read.
I didn't think it's real about somebody.
No, you can read it.
Who is this author?
I don't know the guy.
It's a guy?
Oh, it's a guy. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Amazing that they published that.
Yeah, yes, and it just is so accurate. And that was Yisro. One, now I can assure you, I've never read anything like that from a non-Jew in my life. But when he says it's biblical, that is biblical. What he wrote, and it's almost as though he gets through Ruach HaKodesh and writes that sort of stuff. So I would say that Yisro he's the one in his generation. He's a listener, not a hearer. Everybody else heard, and then quickly put it out of their minds. But there was somebody else who didn't put it out of their mind, and that was a woman. She was called Rachav. That happened when she was 10. She was 10 years of age when Kriyas Yamsuf happened. And what does she say to the two spies that turn up? We heard what Hashem did for you, and I'm going to help you. So listen to this. This is absolutely astonishing stuff. It then says the following thing. And if we get time, I'll tell you about. Maybe I'll start maybe next week about the girl that I wrote about who walks in her footsteps. Okay, so basically the Medrash says Rachav was only 10 years old when Bnei Yisrael left Egypt. For the entire 40 years that the Jewish people travelled in the desert, so that when the story happened, she was about 50. But what that means in those days, I'm not sure, because people lived longer, looked different and stuff. She lived an immoral life, so she was a courtesan. At the end of her 50th year, she converted and became a Jew. So when she was 50. She said, Rabbanu Shalom, now she said, this Medrash quotes her, in 3 areas I have sinned: Nida, Challah, and candle lighting. Because of these 3 things, please forgive me for those sins through the rope, the window, and the wall. So if you remember, rope, window, and wall were all aspects of the story which had protected the spies, put the rope, and they were able to escape down, all that sort of stuff. Does anything strike you as strange about that medrash? I mean, midrashim are strange anyway. Does that strike you as strange? Well, I wrote here, the midrash is profoundly puzzling. How could you have sinned in those three areas? None of them applied to her. She wasn't Jewish. She was not Jewish. She was not a Jew, and therefore no obligation to keep the laws of Nida. In fact, non-Jewish women are not Nida. The halacha of Nida does not apply to non-Jewish women, only to Jewish women. Challah, or have you heard of a non-Jewish woman taking challah? No, it doesn't work. And Shabbos candles. After the Inquisition, there are non-Jewish women who lit Shabbos candles, but of course, they were Jewish women. Good. And this literally rings a bell because, remember, Sorry Mino, there was 3 miracles that happened to her in her life. And then when Rivka comes out, 3 miracles come back. And we'd said in one of our earlier shirim that all the Ovas and Imas were here to repair the damage done by Adam and Chava. So, but she's not Jewish. So, to answer the question, you have to turn to the life of Yisro, which we said before. So we'll come back to that in a second. But listen, what Rachav was referring to here was she had not fulfilled her role as a woman and a daughter of Chava to repair that damage until now. Because we're all sons or daughters of Adam and Chava. Through these 3 items, she used to save Yeshua's spies. She saved 2 Jewish lives and asked them that this should be her contribution to putting right what Adam and Chava had done wrong. This is deeply astonishing stuff. So she becomes one of the stars of Klal Yisrael. But let's look at this.
Can you just clarify that then?
Sure.
So she felt that as a daughter of Chava,
Yeah.
she was still obligated
Yes.
to those
Yes.
mitzvahs.
But the thing that is the earth-shattering thing from my point of view, and that's why I said she is greater than Yisro, because Yisro had a teacher called Moshe. How could you not? And she didn't have anyone. So she worked it all out herself. She heard, or rather she listened to what happened. Everybody else put it out of their mind. Or like, the Iranians are saying, it was a great victory they had in the last 2 weeks. They've got no planes left. Did you see the video of the Israeli planes, about 100 of them flying in formation over Tehran? That's a victory! And we destroyed thousands of Israeli planes. And Tel Aviv, half of Tel Aviv doesn't exist anymore. And so they just rewrite history. It's like the Soviet Union. And they just totally made this stuff up. When the Germans advanced, the Soviet army collapsed. No, it didn't. The men wore women's skirts to pretend to be women to run away. No, they didn't. And just make the stuff up. So they're going around and lying like crazy. And gaslighting, I think, is the new expression people use. And she wasn't buying any of it. And then she goes on to have all these fantastic, a marriage with Yeshua. And, wow. So listen to this. There was another important point to say, how are we doing for time? Yeah. In Parshas Shlach Lecha, when of course it talks about the spies going in, unsurprisingly, when it comes to the Haftarah is Yeshua's spies going in. And there was a time in history when we weren't allowed to read from the Sefer Torah in public, and consequently, what happened was the rabbis come up with an idea. We'll read bits of Nach, which interface is thematically connected to what we would be reading if we could read from the Chumash. So if I was to ask you, what would you say was the connection between the story of Yeshua and Rachav and the spies and the Parsha Shlach, you would say, again, duh, it's so tremendously obvious. But he says no, the reason it's there is not because 2 stories of spies being sent in, it's about Rachav. And he says something really, really brilliant, and this is Rabbi Yerucham, who's one of my very, very great teachers, although I never met him, obviously. But Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz of Mir, he says, astonishingly, that if you were to take the spiritual level of the Meraglim, right? So the Meraglim, we've just come out from Egypt. We've seen incredible miracles. We've gone, not only did we see Kriyas Yam Suf, it's not a question of listening, And the Talmud famously says, Ein Edom Shmiel Ariyah. Right? You can't compare listening to something to seeing it with your own eyes. But they just didn't see Courtesan of Canaanite. The spies that went in to spy out the land of Israel from Moses went through Courtesan of Canaanite. So they're actually there. They saw the columns of water, which is salt water, and spring water for them to drink. Nice eye level. So they could, as they went through. And trees grew up miraculously quickly with peaches and pears and stuff like that, and candy. And they experienced that. So if you were to take the spiritual level of the spies, I don't know where you would calculate that. Right? So what floor are we on? The 6th floor. So let's say that's there on the 6th floor. And Rachav is there. Right? And yet, she gets it right and they get it wrong. So how is that possible? So he gives a motion. And he says, if you were to take a baby acorn and you see it dropping in the ground, you come back somehow or other, 6 months later, and you see that tiny little blade of grass has popped its head above the soil. And this is a baby
Oak tree.
Oak tree. Sitting next to it or nearby is that a mother oak tree? I suppose it is. The oak tree that gave birth to it. It's a fully grown oak tree. It's incredible. Going to weather the strongest storms. And this is just a little fragile thing. Could you compare that to that? Or suppose somebody was to offer you a job. You just graduated from college, and somebody wants to offer you a job, and he is called Mr. Rachav from Toronto back in the day. Huge tzaddik, and I think the world's richest Jewish man. But as you know, it all unraveled, and he lost almost all of his money. Right? So this Mr. Rachav says, I like you, and I think you're a very talented young lady or young man, and therefore I'd like you to start you in my business. Starting salary of $175,000 a year. That's a nice starting salary. Okay. At the same time, there's another guy. And he says, I've just started a company. Now, look, we're just working out from a garage in Seattle, and but we're working on computers, and we just need. He said, pay $175,000. I can't even pay you $75,000. The truth is, I can only pay you $50,000. My name is Bill Gates, by the way. So which one would you take? Of course, you would take the other one. But they're stuck, and it's going to come unraveled. You should have taken Bill Gates, because Bill Gates is on the way up. So if you look at the fully grown oak tree, it's fully grown, it's mighty, it's but this has got something that doesn't have. This one's on the way up. They've plateaued. They've stopped growing, which is why they bring back a bad report. But she is about to grow much higher than them because she's growing. They've stopped growing. She started growing, and it's a growth which isn't going to stop, as we see with the people that she has. All because she listened. Something people generally don't do. She listens, she internalizes, and she makes it part of her, and she's, as you pointed out, is willing to actually bet on her life that this is right, and she's going to be doing the right thing. Yeah.
Is it appropriate to say that somebody who really listens might be a critical thinker and might be a truth seeker?
Oh,
and they're
yes.
not satisfied till they really delve.
100%. Yeah. Absolutely, and that's the Rebbe. Rebbe is the quintessential truth seeker, because everything that is flawed, he can't put up with baloney and lies and obfuscation, etc. A friend of mine told me that there was a guy he was working with, and he was a Christian missionary, and or even better, I remember I was once at a dinner. There was two guest speakers at the dinner, myself and the Speaker of the House of Commons. It was called Viscount Tony Pandy. Lord Tony Pandy. And I loved this old man. I just fell in love straight away. Fabulous, fabulous guy. Time to tell you this story. You want to hear a fabulous story?
Sure.
So it was in a show called Shrubberies in Manchester, and it was a fundraiser for Hill House, where I used to be the rabbi. And I'd say I just totally fell in love with this guy. And he, being Lord Tony Pandy, now he was a Christian, a Methodist lay preacher, but a great, great lover and admirer of the Jewish people. So much so that when his friend, somebody called Sidney Hamburger, asked him to come and speak at this fundraising dinner, this old guy who was in his 80s and dying of cancer got on the train, which in those days was a 4.5 hour schlep, from London to come up to speak on behalf of his beloved Jewish people. Anyway, so what happened was, he spoke first, and he told the story, Viscount Tony Pandy, of the first Jew he ever met. He was born in Wales, and when he was born in Wales, there was in the town one Jew, somebody called Isaacs, Mr. Isaacs. And this Jew his real name was George Thomas. The little boy was called Geordie Thomas. And we're talking, I think, around about 1913, 1914. Little boy, he was about 8, 9. And the Jew called Isaacs got hold of him one day and made him a proposition. If you come into my house on Friday night and on Saturday morning to light the coal fire, of course what we now know as a Shabbos goy. Incidentally, I've never met a Shabbos goy who didn't have a life of brocha. It was a consequence of helping Jews lighting Shabbos. Anyway, he did go on to become the Speaker of the House of Commons. Colin Powell was the head of the American Army, spoke fluent Yiddish. He was a Shabbos guy. Anyway, so basically, if he'd come in on a Friday night and Shabbos morning and light the coal fire, he would earn for this tuppence. We have in the UK a 2-penny coin. Tuppence. If you ever saw the film Mary Poppins, there's the song "Feed the Birds, Tuppence a Bag." Anyway, so he came home with, this was a treasure in 1930, it was a vast fortune, to come in to show his mother his first ever wage. And this strict Methodist lady was at the sink washing dishes, and she sees out the corner of her eye a little boy went like this. So she slowly dried her hands and she turned to him and she said, in her Welsh accent, "Where did you get that, boy?" "He said the Jew, Mr. Isaacs, he gave it to me, Mum." "Why?" "After going to his house on a Friday night and a Saturday morning, that's his Sabbath, to light his coal fire. If I light this coal fire every week, I get the tuppence." "Take it back, boy!" And Viscount Tony Pandy said he remembers as little Geordie Thomas, with tears welling up in his eyes. "But he said I could have it." "Take it back, boy!" "But it's mine." "Take it back!" "But why?" "You don't take money from a man to help him serve his God." And so little Geordie Thomas walked back to the Jew called Isaacs to return the tuppence, and the Jew called Isaac would hear nothing of this and marched the little boy back to his mother, and there started a fight between the religious Christian and the religious Jew over the fate of this tuppence, and they reached a compromise. Geordie Thomas would be permitted to keep the tuppence on that first occasion. After that, he would light the Jews' fire for free. And then he turned round. This is actually not too far from this. He turned round and he said to this audience, I think there was about 400 people there, "And you Jews, you've forgotten who you are. When we in this country were living in caves, you'd already built your golden temple in Jerusalem. When we in this country were wearing bearskins, you'd already written the book that would be the ethical and moral inspiration of mankind. Never be ashamed of being Jewish. You've forgotten who you are." That's astonishing. Yeah. Anyway, so that's not too far away from that. There are some people who see. Let's go back and finish off this wonderful woman. I say, when I was reading about her last night, I was just literally crying. This is so moving. She's such an incredible person. Okay, so basically, listen to this. Reb Simcha Zissel, who was the founder of Kelm and the teacher of Rabbi Rucham here, he wrote a letter to his son who just recovered from an illness, which I translated and put in a book. And he said the following thing. What does it mean? Hashem has sent you refuah shalema, in order you'll be able to do all the kindness with the rov, with the many, which I know is what you want to do with Klal Yisrael. What does it mean to benefit the many? Rachav did an act of kindness for two people who were acting on behalf of all the Jewish people. She was consequently seen as having helped the entire Jewish people. Otherwise, how could they promise her that no Jew would harm any of her family? This gives you an insight into the enormity of the reward of helping the Klal, the group, Klal Yisrael. It also points to the incalculable repercussions of having a clear perspective. Be somebody who listens, somebody who sees. The entire world, including the king of Jericho, heard what Hashem had done for Bnei Yisrael from the splitting of the Red Sea until now. But Rachav saw the events with clarity. Let's see what came of seeing the world with clarity. Rachav had lived a life of immorality for 40 years. Her clarity elevated her from that life to embrace Torah and become the wife of a Jew who was the closest in spiritual level to Moshe Rabbeinu, his successor Yeshua. And that was not enough. She also became the mother of Cohanim prophets, including Huldah, which we looked at a moment ago. It's astonishing to think of a moment's epiphany, a light bulb moment, that is immediately acted upon can utterly transform a human being. It caused Rachav to do chesed with 2 ambassadors of the Jewish people and subsequently become the wife of the leader of that people. In one moment, she discovered and recognized the emunah in Hashem that lay in her heart, and knew with total conviction that Hashem, your God, He is the God in the heavens and on the earth below, which is what she said to them. She knew that her rebellion against the king of Jericho, for harbouring the 2 spies and not handing them over, placed her life in immediate danger, but that didn't matter to her, as she was saving the ambassador of Hashem's people. Now we can see the reward for those who worry on behalf of Klal Yisrael, experiencing their pain as though it's their own, because indeed it is. And they rejoice in the celebrations of others because these celebrations are their celebrations too. That's what we do as Jews. Remember that story of I told you of the lady in the framing shop that I met? And her friend was there, his son just came back from Gaza, minus a hand, minus an eye, and blind in the other eye. And I was crying then as well. I seem to be doing a lot of crying since I moved here. And this non-frum lady who owns that store there, she said, that's what I love about living here. The unity, the feeling that we're all one. Hashem is of course limitless, so is every element of Him, including His rewards. And who deserves such rewards more than a woman whose 40 years of immorality and turpitude, I wrote the word turpitude, were transformed into merits. As the Gemara says, in the place that Bali Tshuva stand complete, Tzaddikim were not able to stand. That's the point of the story of Rachav, according to the Chazal, who echo the words of the Sifri. Someone, Rachav, came from a people who Klal Yisrael were told so beyond redemption that they had to be completely eradicated, yet she became the closest to Hashem. He reciprocated and became close to her. How much more so in the case of Jews who carry out the instructions of the Torah? They too come close to Hashem. I think she's absolutely astonishing. And she did it herself. She didn't, like Avram Avinu. Nobody taught Avram Avinu. Eventually they did when he went to Sheba. But the first discovery and then the absolute determination not to let that idea go. Because if you don't take that moment of inspiration when it comes and act on it straight away, no matter if you had the most brilliant share, the most inspiring story, you were moved, you cried and all that sort of stuff, if you don't allow it to change you now and act straight away, in a month's time you'll say, yeah, I don't know what it was about anymore, but it was a really, really good share. But it didn't change your life when it could have changed your life. She allowed it to change her life. Right, I shall see you next week.